Okay, good morning, Boker Tov. Boker Tov, Chanukah Sameach. It's so exciting to be here, to have such a nice full room. You're all welcome to come every Monday from 10. Oh, we have, sorry, I have a, Rebecca? Something's wrong here. We have an echo. I have to find out why that is. I think they have to. Anyway, I'll say a quick hello to our friends on Zoom, our regulars. We have an echo here. I'm not sure what it is. I have an echo. I'm on mute, but I have an echo. You have to be off audio. That's what it is. Okay. Do you mind just helping me? I'm looking for it. Okay, while we figure that out, hopefully, it won't sound terrible. You can also move this. That won't happen. Thank you, Rebecca, our whiz in many ways. Halacha, technology, B'riyut Haguf, thank you. Okay, Chanukah Sameach, everyone. We have to get started. We have a lot to talk about today. Once again, you're all welcome to join us during the second semester after Hanukkah break. Not really the second semester, but after Hanukkah break, you're welcome to join us. We'll be what we do is we study Talmud in a deep and meaningful way. Not an intimidating way, accessible to all. So feel free to join us at any point. Today, we're going to be looking at some Talmudic texts, but we have a little while before we get to them because we are going to explore our topic from a we're going to sort of zoom out and look at our topic throughout history. The topic today, which even when I chose this title, a couple of months ago, already it was relevant. Chanukah as a response to modern anti-Semitism, okay? Already it was relevant, but boy, as the weeks go by, it just doesn't stop, right? Every single day, the UN reports, which completely underestimated the number of anti-Semitic incidents in the world. Kanye, every other day, right? It's shocking. I want to also give a little disclaimer before we begin, which is that I was a little nervous to choose this topic because I feel that it can be taken to a place of, which I'm not comfortable with, of standing and saying things like the world is against us, right? Generalities. And I have a deep concern. On the one hand, I feel nervous about talking about this topic in a way which propels that worldview. And so I know that on the one hand, we are certainly at the point, and have been for a while, where we cannot turn away from anti-Semitism. We cannot ignore it, even if we live here, perhaps especially if we live here. And at the same time, I would like to talk about it in a way, and I hope you'll join me, which highlights the hate and the animosity and the xenophobia, and at the same time, and the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and at the same time does not generalize to the entire non-Jewish world. So that's just my little disclaimer, which we're gonna keep going through. Okay, so as I said, anti-Semitism is on the rise everywhere. It's in places we never imagined that it would be seen. I just finished this past Shabbat a book, which I'll be quoting today, which I really cannot recommend enough. It's not an easy read, called, and it's got quite a provocative title, People Love Dead Jews, okay? See, a few of you have read it, okay? Boy, that title, right? By Dara Horn. An incredible book, so important. We'll be quoting some of it today. Dara Horn, I'll send the link to anyone who wants. She opens up her book with an unbelievable fact and story, which is, her chapter is called The World's Most Beloved Dead Jew, which is, of course, it took me a minute to think, but Anne Frank, okay? And she tells a story about how it took that the guides in the Anne Frank house, there was apparently a rule that they could not look externally outwardly Jewish. And a guy came along and had a kippah on, okay? A guy, a religious enough guy that he wore a kippah in the Anne Frank house, okay? Think about the irony. And for 4 months, he was told he had to take it off, but he fought this, and it was disputed, and eventually it became allowed for him to wear a kippah while guiding the Anne Frank house, okay? Right? Just the irony of this fact, and that's how she opens the book. So really, I think that there's so many big things where we sometimes read the news and say, well, what can we do? What can we do? What can we say? What can we do? But there are also so many small things, and I think that's perhaps what we'll be emphasizing today. Okay, I have a little slideshow. I'm just going to share that really quick for everyone. I have most everything is on your sheet, your source sheet if you don't have it, but just in case. Miriam, can I ask you a quick favor? I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Miriam, my fellow halacha student here. Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have this soon. Okay. I want to pause. We're going to get back to the great topic of anti-Semitism in 3 seconds. I want to pause for a moment and share with you a line from the Shulchan Aruch, which is on your source sheet. The Shulchan Aruch by Rav Yosef Karo, the most significant codification of Jewish law that we have today, most recent significant codification, writes as follows. He says, Hilchata, okay, in source 1, Hilchata betela Megillat Ta'anit b'chol hayamim haktuvim ba, mutar litanot bahem. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch teaches us that the book called Megillat Ta'anit has been canceled, and talk about cancel culture, has been canceled. It no longer applies, and all the holidays which were recorded in it, we no longer celebrate, and we're allowed to fast on. What is this thing? What is he talking about? Megillat Ta'anit, it turns out, was a book. We still have it, a significant book. Thank you so much, Miriam, for getting Rebecca. Was a significant book that we have from the Second Temple period, okay? Megillat Ta'anit, Second Temple period, which had in it many holidays, okay? Kaf Hei Kislev was among them, but it recorded many holidays that the Jews celebrated over small victories over the Greeks, okay? That was about Chanukah. It also talks about Purim, but we're only talking about Chanukah today. So apparently there was a day you might have heard of called Nicanor's Day. There were all sorts of celebrations in Second Temple times, that small little holidays that the Jews celebrated. And the Shulchan Aruch is telling us, of all the holidays, okay, of which there were quite a few that the Jews celebrated, special days where they were not allowed to fast on that day or give eulogies, the Shulchan Aruch says we no longer celebrate those days. Okay, we don't focus so much on the victories over the not so many days of the year, but Chanukah we do. Okay, Chanukah and Purim. So he says all the holidays, all the new holidays that are mentioned in Megillat Ta'anit no longer exist except for Chanukah and Purim. Okay, so all those other days, Yom Nicanor, etc., you're allowed to fast on them. So I want to begin by asking, what is special about Chanukah? We're not going to talk about Purim today. We'll talk about that in a few months. Why did Chanukah survive? Why did those other days not survive? What was it about Chanukah? And how did Chazal, the rabbis of the Talmud, shape Chanukah to make it something that did last? Okay, it wasn't just a small military victory at a particular time in a particular place. It represents something much bigger than it, and for all time. And so that is what we're going to see more of today. For the sake of time, I'm just going to run through this. I have a few slides about the situation, the rise of anti-Semitism. You can see the chart. The yellow line is 2021. I'll just read to you this statistic from the ADL. More than 2,715 instances of Jew hatred, including assaults, were reported last year, an increase of 34% from 2020. Okay, so that's referring to 2021. 34% up in 2021. I shudder to wonder what's going to happen in 2022 and 2023. And the highest number of incidents since the ADL began keeping records in 1979. Wow. This is in the world, or is it the US? So this is the US. Thank you for pointing out. This is the US. We know that it's also up in the world. I read last week it's going up in Germany. These are scary statistics. There was a very scary thing that happened in Boston last year. Perhaps some of you read about it, the Boston Mapping Project, where a map was put out by anti-Zionists and anti-Semites, that's another class I like to give, how those two are the same thing, where they mapped all of the Jewish organizations and community centers and synagogues because they wanted to point out, they wanted to show all the places in Boston that, quote, had institutional support for the colonization of Palestine. Okay? Now think about how scary it is to have a map. Talk about, right? How scary is that? Okay. Goes without saying, the incidents over the past few years, Dara Horn talks about this in her book as well. Who could have imagined growing up in North America, things like the Tree of Life, synagogue in Pittsburgh, San Diego, Poway, the Chabad Center, and the terrible tragedies and lives lost so indiscriminately, just because of anti-Semitism. And so I want to probe with you a little deeper today. What is going on here? What is the essence of anti-Semitism? How do we define anti-Semitism? How do we talk about it in a way that really conveys what is so wrong with it, and how do we respond to it? Okay, I want to take a moment and go to ancient times and say, actually, before you look at the source, when do we really believe anti-Semitism started? When is the first real? When does anti-Semitism start? So I'm asking you.
Egypt.
Oh, interesting. As in ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
What Kufa? What period? Paro, Sefer Shmos. Okay. Why? What's anti-Semitic there?
Well, they say that there's a people living amongst us who are different,
Amazing.
and they might take the side if we're attacked of the invaders. Excellent. And so we need to deal with that.
Excellent. So a fear, a xenophobia, right? There's these strange people who aren't with, or they're with us and they're not with us. They live here, but they're not with us. What's your name? Elisa.
I think that Emma was the first witness, because that was really the first attack that we ever got received after the official determination.
Interesting. Okay. Interesting. That's an interesting idea. To think about that more. Yes. What's your name? Tamar.
I think it goes all the way back to Noah, because that's the first time it's really been talked about.
Noah and who?
Noah and his family.
Okay, as in they're trying to save themselves and save the world, and everyone else is interesting. And that fits with the idea that I'm going to reject, which is that anti-Semitism is not necessarily about the children of Shem, but I want to say anti-Semitism is really about Jews. Carol.
I think it's the early Christians.
Interesting. The Crusades. What do you feel? Let's boil that down. What do you feel is different about the Middle Ages that makes that anti-Semitism different from Paro, different from Amalek and other things before?
They're actively trying to kill the Jews and expel them and really just get rid of them entirely as people.
Okay. What else? What characterized? Yes. And what else although you could say Purim is the same. What characterized that anti-Semitism?
I didn't think that was to convert people because they would
Okay, so first of all, they would not, that's a very important point. They would not let you, no live and let live, okay? No, everyone has to be like us. There's something more. What were some of the theories that were sent around about Jews in the Middle Ages? What were they saying about Jews? We drank the blood of Christ, right? We were usurers, right? We caused the plague. We caused the plague. Okay. Now we see something. Yeah.
We killed Christ.
Right. We killed Christ. Excellent. Okay. Now, what's wrong? What's suddenly so different about that kind of anti-Semitism? It's not just trying to kill us. It's not just trying to kill us. It's not saying you're different and because you won't be like us, that's a big problem, okay? Oh, excellent, okay? It is creating myths, conspiracy theories, fake news about the Jews, okay? That is a whole nother layer of anti-Semitism, which we see is a very big piece of it. And it's an interesting question, when did that part of anti-Semitism begin? And if we had to really say, if I had to boil down, so what is anti-Semitism? We're hearing here, first of all, some kind of conflict with the nation that they are a part of, right? So if we go back to Chanukah for a moment, We want everyone to be the Greeks wanted everyone to be polytheistic, okay, and as Hellenistic as possible. The Jews actually assimilated quite well into the Greco-Roman world. However, when they wanted them to be completely polytheistic and not do a Brit Milah and things like that, that's when the tension really happened. Okay, that's a good example. We also see the claim that there's a certain that like Paro, like Purim, we just don't want anyone else. Okay, like the Shoah. We haven't talked about the Shoah yet. Like we don't want anyone around who is not from our race, and therefore you need to be eliminated, exterminated. And then we have the layer of the conspiracy theory. Of course, this is out of order in how things go. The conspiracy theories we saw also in Germany and in Europe before the Holocaust. That's a major part of the growth of the spread of the spurring it further. So what's interesting is you guys have put your fingers, okay, you guys are like super incredible academic historians, because this is a great debate among the historians. When does anti-Semitism start? Some historians say, no, anti-Semitism starts for the first time in the 19th century. Okay, anti-Semitism is the form of hatred of the Jews. We can't take away from the fact that anti-Semitism took on a whole nother category before the Shoah, and that is true. That is truly when anti-Semitism began. All of that stuff before was conflicts, hatred of Jews, okay, but not anti-Semitism. Then we have others who say, like was proposed here, that really the Middle Ages is where we see anti-Semitism take on this widespread, deep, not just one nation, one particular group, one particular place, but these narratives, these ideas, these fantasies, these ugly fantasies, these nightmares about Jews. That's from the Middle Ages, we see that. And others, which we're going to see in a moment, say anti-Semitism, even in the form of conspiracy theories, existed in the ancient world. And so this story is not new and has existed since the beginning of time. So I wanted to show you, I'm going to read to you from the historian Shia Cohen. Now, it's interesting, this book was written a while ago. I studied it way back in graduate school, and so I wonder if he would still say this now. I wonder, he lives in Boston, so we can ask him, given the Boston Mapping Project. His book, From the Maccabees to the Mishnah, a great book of history on this period, he writes as follows. The Jews of both the diaspora and the land of Israel had an uneasy relationship with their environment. For the most part, they were willing to support the state and to partake of the cultural bounty of the Hellenistic world. But they were unwilling to surrender their identity, their wish to belong, but at the same time, to remain distinct. Okay, does this sound so different from most of us who grew up in Chutz La'aretz and tried to live in the UK or France or Northern North America? In order to maintain their distinctiveness and identity, most Jews of the ancient world sought to separate themselves from their Gentile neighbors. The Jews also buried their dead separately, fast maintaining separation from Gentiles in death as in life. They refused to participate in public ceremonies that involved worship of the gods or of the emperor. In other words, they refused to participate in practically all the communal events of society. In the polyethnic Hellenistic and Roman empires, national distinctiveness and loyalty to ancestral customs were not unusual, but the Jews carried their separateness to unusual lengths. So before we go on, we're going to see that Shia Cohen's, his characterization is, look, it's not like anti-Semitism in the sense of conspiracy theories and extermination of the Jews. It's just that the reality of Jews trying to be committed to Jewish law and Jewish life and live amongst this world, which was not a tolerant society. It was tolerant to a certain degree, but not super tolerant. It was just caused conflict, and that led to Chanukah. So he goes on, but their exclusiveness and separation did not prevent the Jews from seeking civic equality with their Gentile neighbors. During the first century of our era, severe disturbances broke out in Alexandria, Caesarea, Antioch. These were all places where Jews lived at the time. The details behind these events are obscure, but most scholars agree that the Jewish communities of these places antagonized certain elements of the local population by demanding both tolerance and equality. In order to support their position, the opponents of the Jews, especially in Alexandria, resorted to anti-Jewish propaganda. Their leader, Appian, wrote a book that attacked the Jews. How is this ferocious outburst against the Jews to be explained? To dismiss it as anti-Semitism will not work because anti-Semitism did not exist in antiquity. Anti-Semitism did not exist, it goes on. Anti-Semitism did not exist in antiquity, but anti-Judaism did. Anti-Judaism was the consequence of political strife between the Jews and their neighbors in Judea and the diaspora. The revolt of the Maccabees against the Seleucid Empire marks the entrance of the Jews into the rough and tumble world of the politics of the Hellenistic world. So Shia Cohen is taking the position that this is anti-Judaism. There's a conflict based on real problems. Okay, there's some anti-Jewish propaganda, he throws that in there, but he does not consider it anti-Semitism. I want to go ahead now.
Find that those two different things. What's anti-Jew? I mean, it's come to anti-Zionism, it's not anti-Semitism, it's all the same thing. What's the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism?
Right. Well, so that is the perspective of the next scholar. The next scholar, Peter Schaefer, I'm actually not going to read this excerpt from him, but I'm going to explain to you what he talks about. He has an entire book called Judeophobia. Okay, an entire book about Judeophobia in the ancient world. He's talking about even before the time of the Talmud, in the ancient Greco-Roman world. So we're in before and around and after Hanukkah, okay, when Hanukkah happens. And he talks about how, even though, of course, as was mentioned here, there's what we would call anti-Semitism in the Bible, right? We have Paro, we have nations trying to destroy the Jews, we have Megillat Esther, but he said the first historical case of Jews outside the Bible, let's say beyond the Bible, from the Second Temple times, of Jews living in a city and being attacked for being Jewish, happened in two places. The first really was in 419 BCE, okay, that's pretty early, in a place, I'm just telling you, this isn't on your, you can look on the screen, in a place called Elephantine. Okay, now here's the irony. Look where we are geographically. Elephantine and Alexandria, what country are those ancient cities in? Egypt. Wow. Fascinating. So in Elephantine in 419 BCE, archaeologists discovered a letter, fragments of a letter, okay, which is called the Passover letter, where a Jewish leader at the time writes to a Jewish, some sort of Jewish leadership in the community and defends their right, says, I've been in touch with the Persian Empire who was in charge at the time, and they're saying we are allowed to sacrifice our korban and do whatever we want. They did different things. We won't get into that. They are allowed to keep Pesach, even though their Egyptian neighbors and priests are starting to come out against it. Why? It's different. It's not us. Why do you have to practice differently? Why can't you be like the rest of us? So we see that that is like the first recorded place where we see the society, the leadership and the population is really for no good reason, is saying, no, you shouldn't be able to keep your Pesach, okay? How ironic that it's happening in an ancient city in Egypt, right? That we can't, the Jews are living in Egypt. By the way, they went there after the destruction of the first temple. Some of them went into exile and they went to live in Elephantine, Egypt. Talk about reverse. I saw one scholar called it a reverse exodus. Okay. Now in 38 CE, we have this is really what's super significant for our class today. In Alexandria, which is what Shia Cohen mentioned, there was a leader called Appian who wrote a pamphlet book about the Jews, and filled it with ridiculous assertions. So just to read you a small excerpt, Josephus, the Jewish historian, okay, from the 1st century CE, who was a Jewish historian during Second Temple times, quotes Appian, and he says as follows. This is what Appian said about the Jews. They used to catch a Greek foreigner and fat him thus up every year, and then lead him to a certain wood and kill him, and sacrifice with their accustomed solemnities, and taste of his entrails, and take an oath upon this sacrificing a Greek, that they would ever be at enmity with the Greeks, and that then they threw the remaining parts of the miserable wretch into a certain pit. Then Josephus writes, now this is such a most tragical fable, as is full of nothing but cruelty and impudence, okay? So, he doesn't even, how do you fight something which is such nonsense? How do you argue with that? How do you defend? So Peter Schaefer in his book, who really is the one who says, Judeophobia is the one who says, anti-Semitism started already from Elephantine and already in ancient times, before Hanukkah, and Hanukkah is is a full expression of it. And he says there are three major characteristics to anti-Semitism. Sadly, we're seeing a lot of this today. One, realistic hostility. That's what we saw when the Greeks would say, we want you to worship all of our gods. And the Jews would say, no, you can't attend an event where we're expected to bow down to idols, right? So realistic hostility. There's no conspiracy theories yet. It's just there's a real conflict here. We need to figure out how to work through that. The second thing is xenophobia. Okay, now here what's interesting is it's based on a kernel of truth. It can be based on a kernel of truth, meaning there's this feeling of they are the other, they are strange. They feel all sorts of hatred to it. The truth is we have xenophobia in a lot of societies. We have xenophobia. African Americans in America feel there's been a tremendous amount of xenophobia. We could talk about the Middle East, but I won't get started on that. There's xenophobia is even sometimes between datim and chilonim, right? That if you don't talk to people who are different from you, you build an image of who they are, and it becomes very it becomes something that you're a little fearful of. But this can be based on truth. So for instance, in the Middle Ages, when they said Jews are all usurers, now there were some Jews who were usurers, and there were some Jews who were corrupt usurers. But to take the sample of the 3 or 4 and say all Jews are immoral usurers is completely anti-Semitism. And the third is these fantasy assertions that we saw, right? That the Jews killed Christ, and on and on.
The thing about being usurers, it's the exact same thing people are saying today, the Jews run all the banks. So.
Are they really saying that still? Oh my God.
Or again.
Right.
I mean,
right.
they keep saying it, and that hasn't changed.
Yes. Yep.
A lot of people are saying it as well.
Yes. Very scary times. So I want to read to you this excerpt from Dara Horn, and then we're going to jump into our Talmudic text finally. I said it was a big introduction, sorry. So Dara Horn writes as follows about the holiday of Hanukkah, and I think she summarizes for us. She really puts her finger on the anti-Semitism of Hanukkah that we see in Hanukkah, the Hanukkah story, which is something that we can draw from for today and really resonate with us. So she tells the story, which has been she said she learns this story in Hebrew school, that there were Jewish men in the time of Hanukkah who were in the gymnasium, they were all Olympics and doing sports, who didn't want to look different from all the other men. So they reversed their circumcision, okay? And this has actually been documented by historians. She said, I didn't believe it was true, but then I found it in a history book. In 19th century academic prose, Gratz explains how the leaders of Judea demonstrated their loyalty to the occupying Hellenistic Empire by building a gymnasium and recruiting teenage athletes, only to discover, in uncovering their bodies, they could immediately be recognized as Judeans. But were they to take part in the Olympian Games and expose themselves to the mockery of Greek scoffers? Even this difficulty they evaded by undergoing a painful operation so as to disguise the fact that they were Judeans. Their Zeus-worshipping overlords were not fooled. Within a few years, the regime outlawed not only circumcision, but all of Jewish religious practice, and put to death anyone who didn't comply. 2 distinct patterns of anti-Semitism can be identified by the Jewish holidays that celebrate triumphs over them: Purim and Chanukah. In the Purim version of anti-Semitism, exemplified by the Persian genocidal decrees in the biblical book of Esther, the goal is openly stated and unambiguous: kill all the Jews. Lashmid, la'arog, u'la'abed. In the Hanukkah version of anti-Semitism, whose appearances range from the Spanish Inquisition to the Soviet regime, the goal is still to eliminate Jewish civilization. But in the Hanukkah version, this goal could theoretically be accomplished simply by destroying Jewish civilization while leaving the warm, de-Jewed bodies of its former practitioners intact. For this reason, the Hanukkah version of anti-Semitism often employs Jews as its agents. It requires not dead Jews, but cool Jews, those willing to give up whatever specific aspect of Jewish civilization is currently uncool. Of course, Judaism has always been uncool, going back to its origins as the planet's only monotheism, featuring a bossy and unsexy invisible god. Uncoolness is pretty much Judaism's brand, which is why cool people find it so threatening, and why Jews who are willing to become cool are absolutely necessary to Hanukkah anti-Semitism's success. These converted, quote-unquote, Jews are used to demonstrate the good intentions of the regime, which of course isn't anti-Semitic, but merely requires that its Jews publicly flush thousands of years of Jewish civilization down the toilet in exchange for the worthy prize of not being treated like dirt or not being murdered for a few years, maybe. Certainly, right? Yeah, I know, we have to like breathe after reading that. Pause. Certainly we saw this before the Shoah, right? In the Shoah, there was this feeling before the Shoah that Jews who assimilated well, who looked German, would not be affected by the anti-Semitism before the Shoah. And yes, those who looked Haredi may have been attacked first, but we know what happened in the end, right? It didn't matter. It didn't matter how secular, how uncommitted you were, how assimilated, how German you were. It didn't matter. And so really that's what she's getting at here. So now we're going to... Yes.
Specifically connected to Hanukkah.
Oh, that's exactly what we're getting to right now. Thank you for that perfect segue. Okay, so now we're going to look at the Gemara on Chanukah. Now, interesting thing, we have tractates on a lot of Jewish holidays. We have a tractate on Purim called Masechet Megillah. On Rosh Hashanah, Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Chanukah has no tractate unto itself. Chanukah, as you've probably heard before, is considered slightly controversial. There are some aspects of Hanukkah that the rabbis felt uncomfortable with. They attempted to play up other aspects of Hanukkah. So the very few Talmudic texts we have about Hanukkah, which are really quite few, are found in Masechet Shabbat, where it talks about lighting candles at home, which is a natural entry into talking about lighting candles on Hanukkah. And so one of the things that we're taught about the Hanukkah candles is that we have to light them. Now, where do we light our Hanukkah candles? Oh, there's a lot of answers there. Window, outside, door. Okay, a lot of answers. So we're going to make sense of that. Okay, so let's look at what the Gemara says we need to do. First of all, let's talk about the timing. This was a big deal yesterday for anyone who has family members who really care about the World Cup, right? Because you have to light Hanukkah candles on time. The first night we tried to be enthusiastic about the mitzvah. We light it on time, but that's when the World Cup starts. Luckily, the World Cup went on for 3.5 hours, so it wasn't a problem. Okay, but it turns out there's also a time that you can't light candles anymore, even though it's still dark. There's a time when you have to be finished by. So the Gemara tells us, V'kavta ein zakukla, question mark. The Gemara asks a question. What do you do if a Hanukkah light is extinguished? You light it and within 5 minutes it goes out. So the Gemara tells us that you don't need to relight it, okay? You can. By the way, as an aside, you can without a bracha. You don't need to, okay? And then it raises a contradiction to this statement, okay? Ureminhu. Mitzvata, we're in source 5, by the way. Mitzvata mishatishka hachama ad shetichla regel min hashuk. Turns out that you have to light this Chanukiah between the times of from sunset until the traffic in the marketplace ceases. Okay? When is that? Okay, so first of all, right, when is that? Yes, so in Morocco, it never stops. Right, so it's certainly subjective. It's not objective. That's for sure true. Now it goes on to ask, my love, does that mean since you have from sunset till the foot traffic stops, does that mean that you should rekindle the light after it's gone out? Okay. Maybe you need to do it. They're asking, does this mean your candles need to burn from sunset until the foot traffic ceases in the marketplace? No, that's not what it's saying. Okay. So they said, no, what is this teaching us? This is teaching us that you're allowed to light your Chanukiah from sunset until the foot traffic ceases. When does the foot traffic cease? The Gemara says, how do we know, right? The rest of the year we've been studying, when do you say Shema at night? When do you say Shema in the morning? And we've had a lot of discussions about that. Here, we are asking, when is the final time that you can light candles? When does it have to be done by? Until, says the Gemara, the opinion of Rabba Bar Chana, in the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, until the traffic of the people of Tadmor, the Tarmodai, ceases. Who are the Tarmodai? Oh, such a great question. How are we supposed to know if we're not there? So thankfully we have halacha. We have halacha which tells us. We have books of Jewish law throughout time that tell us what the answer is. The answer is really until people in your neighborhood, if people aren't walking by, if people have gone to sleep and no one's walking by anymore, then that's too late. So interestingly, Rashi teaches us who the Tarmodai are. The Tarmodai are woodcutters. Woodcutters selling their wood. Apparently they were the last ones in the market each night, because what do you need at the market? What do you need from the market at night? Presumably some wood to burn more light, burn fire, which by the way is also, I think, an image here for Hanukkah. So when these merchants of wood would stop selling, that was time to stop. By the way, what else might you want to ask about these wood merchants? Oh, excellent. Who just said that? That was you. Excellent. Were they Jewish?
We know they can about that.
Well, that's okay. Two sides of the same question. So this is a source for the Talmudic commentaries to teach us. This is a really interesting question. Who are we lighting? Who do we want to see? We haven't gotten to the phrase yet. Pirsumei Nisa, publicize the miracle, right? We know that Hanukkah candles are publicizing the miracle, and this is going to get very, very connected to the anti-Semitism theme. Who are we publicizing it for? Everyone? Who's everyone? Ourselves, our family, our neighbors, Jews, non-Jews, everybody, right? So this is a source that a number of Talmudic commentaries use. The fact that the Talmud says here, it's funny, you see how Talmudic interpretation works. All it's trying to tell us is that until the last merchants of the shuk close up, the wood sellers, that's when you have to stop lighting. But the commentaries learn from here that because we care about them, because they're the ones cited, that's to teach us that it's for non-Jews. Hanukkah candles need to be seen by non-Jews. It's not just for Jews. We talk a lot about the candles in our house and our inner light and it affecting us. But here we have a very strong thrust of Rishonim which say Hanukkah candles are lit, we're publicizing the miracle for non-Jews to see. Interesting fact. Let's see what else the Gemara teaches us about these Hanukkah candles, and we will also try to extract a picture of why. Why do we need to publicize our miracle? Tanu Rabbanan, page 3. I think you're on page 3. Tanu Rabbanan, where it says candle for a person in his home. Mitzvat Chanukah, ner ish uveto. Okay, this you'll have heard, and I believe Osha mentioned it this morning. The mitzvah of Hanukkah is for a person in his household. V'mahadrim ner l'kol achad v'achad. And if you want to be super bonus points, dedicated mahadrin, do it the best way possible. Each one lights. U'mahadrin mahadrin, and the most mihadrin, most beautiful way to do the mitzvah is Yom Rishon. Oh, we have two opinions here. Machloket, debate. Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai says Yom Rishon madlik shmona, mikan ve'elach pochet v'holech. Okay, famous debate. Beit Shammai says you light 8 on the first night and go down to 1. Beit Hillel omrim Yom Rishon madlik achat, mikan ve'elach mosif v'holech. We hope like Beit Hillel, who says you light 1 and you go, the lights grow in ascending order throughout Chanukah. I believe this is deeply connected to the essence of this idea of this being like we're publicizing the miracle, right? It makes sense that the light is increasing each night going up, getting brighter. Next paragraph, Amar Ula. Now they give a little explanation in the Gemara for why Beit Shammai was of the position that we light 8 to 1 and why Beit Hillel went 1 to 8. Fligiba, Amarei B'mar Rava. 2 rabbis argued to understand what the reason was. I'm going to skip to the English for this part. One said that the reason for Beit Shammai's opinion corresponds to the incoming days, and the reason, we're skipping to the next line. The reason for Beit Hillel's opinion is that the number of lights corresponds to the outgoing days, and one said that the reason for Beit Shammai's opinion is that it corresponds to the bulls of the festival of Sukkot, okay? So here the Gemara tells us that the idea that you light 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 of Beit Shammai is because the number of animals sacrificed on Sukkot also went downward. And so Beit Shammai saw a deep connection, which we don't have time to get into, between Chanukah and the holiday of Sukkot, a biblical holiday and a rabbinic holiday, and he wanted to go with that theme. Beit Hillel, however, says, and this is important, Ma'alin v'kodesh v'lo maridin, right? It's a principle. Ma'alin v'kodesh v'lo maridin. We elevate in holiness. We don't downgrade, okay? The Gemara tells us another important fact about the Hanukkah candles, okay? It says, I don't know if I have this on your sheet. Yes. Okay, have a look at the slide. Tanu Rabbanan. Now, where do we place the Hanukkah candles? Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis teach us. Ner Chanukah mitzvah lahanicha al petach beito mibachutz. First of all, interesting. The Gemara itself says, put it on the entrance to your house, outside. Okay? Im hayadar ba'aliyah, but if you live in an apartment building or second floor, menicha b'chalon hasmucha l'reshut harabim. So the Talmud is giving us practical information for how we practice this mitzvah, based on where we live, different places, different placement. It also helps us by saying, okay, that there's going to be times, the rabbis know there's going to be times that it's going to be difficult to light candles publicly. Okay, so it tells us, Ubashata sakana menicha al shulchano v'dayo. In times of sakana, doesn't say don't light. Since you can do it, you don't have to put it by your window or put it by your front door, put it on the table and that's enough. Ubashat sakana. Sakana can be understood as most likely some sort of edict against practicing Jewish practice throughout history. And so, interesting that it does not say you don't need to light Bishat Sakana, right? Usually Judaism in general errs on the side of protect your life, the Chai Bahem, okay? But Hanukkah candles are super important to light here. And also because so connected, we have these two sides, that the Hanukkah candles are a reminder of the Jews surviving in the face of this radical anti-Semitism of the Greek Hellenizers, of the extreme Hellenizers and the Greeks. And so even B'Shat Sakana, we still light. So now you're going to be telling me the commentaries for a moment. Let's say you live in a courtyard. Okay, let's say you have a courtyard, a few houses around a courtyard, and or like a gated community, right? Like they have those in Florida. I don't know where else, right? Sometimes. Okay, where do you put your Chanukiah so that you are publicizing the miracle? Oh, interesting. Okay, so someone said by the window, okay, and someone said by the house. So we have here the voice of various Talmudic commentaries. Rashi teaches us that we put it on the outside, okay? It says mi bachutz, very important word, petach habayit mi bachutz, on the outside. This is in order to publicize the miracle, and it was not in the public domain, but rather in the courtyard, says Rashi, as their houses were open to a courtyard, okay? I didn't bring this on your short sheet, but you can see it up here. So Rashi is teaching us that the word on the outside, even though the emphasis is, we have the concept of lefarsem et hanes, to publicize the miracle. And I want to pause for a moment and tell you that phrase, that concept, doesn't appear by a lot of holidays. It appears only, that phrase, Pirsume Nisa, it appears by Chanukah in all sorts of ways. It appears by Purim, okay? Purim also has an aspect of publicizing the miracle. And we see it one other time with regard to Pesach in the Gemara, where it says that we have to ensure that a poor person has 4 cups of wine. Part of that is publicizing the miracle, that everyone should get to have 4 cups of wine, publicizing the miracle of the Exodus. So for the most part, publicizing the miracle is associated with the rabbinic holidays of Purim and Chanukah, and clearly fits very deeply with the fact that these two holidays this is the antidote to people trying to enemies trying to wipe out the Jewish people. So on the outside, Rashi is saying very clearly, even if you have a courtyard, you light it at the entrance to your house, the doorway to your house. Moshe, do you want to say?
Rashi never said only in Israel that we light outside.
So I think that's just practical, because many places, although in South Africa, and it's summer now, right? So certainly when I was growing up, it wasn't really possible. You know, I lived in an apartment and it was freezing. So I think that's why mostly. And of course, I do think in Israel, we have this feeling of we can be right out there. I mean, it's an amazing thing to walk around and see all those Hanukkah boxes outside.
I just wanted, my husband went yesterday to the Rav Steinberg share and came home with all of this new halachot. And when we went to light, so he says, okay, we have to put it outside. So outside of the house, outside of the gate.
The side, not the mezuzah side, the other side, right? Okay.
Outside, so we're putting it like on the street, in front of the, like literally on the like on the sidewalk, right in front of the fence. And, we're making bracha. And as we're making the bracha, it's really sweet. This young mother with her little child walking a dog walked past, and I made eye contact with her, and they stopped, and they did the brachas with us. It was really like, I was like, that is really the farnes and tanes, and to share also, like, I don't know that she was going home to light candles.
Right, 100%. We've had numerous times our neighbors who don't light their own candles have come and joined us. So there it's interesting because I think now here you're getting to my next part of my share, thank you, which is how do we upgrade this? How do we upgrade this in modern times? What does it mean to publicize the miracle in modern times? And what does it mean to publicize the miracle in Israel today? And so we see there's an element of that, of the Jewish people itself. If Hanukkah is about the Jewish people, so many of them assimilating and Hellenizing, then part of the Pirsumei Nisa is also to reach, to build bridges. It's an opportunity to come together with people who might not light and include them. I want to share with you one other idea about the doorway. So 1 second. So far, Rashi says it's the doorway dafka. Now, why would Rashi say this? Why not? It makes much more sense to say, go put it at the gate of the community where cars will come by and see it. Why? Okay. So now we see this also an element that it has to be connected to the home. Okay, so we see this dialectic, this tension in the sources. What is more important? Is it more important to light our homes up on Hanukkah and to take that miracle and that message and infuse our homes and our children with this idea that the Jewish people have survived in the face of anti-Semitism throughout history, and that it's a miracle that we are still here, and especially now today? What are we trying to convey? By the way, the doorpost also has special meaning on Pesach. We see again, these 3 holidays have a connection, right? The doorpost is what spared us in Egypt.
I'm talking about the home. I also was taught that it's the home where you sleep.
Yes.
So, like, for example, I'm going to go light candles for my son today in Sukkot. When I get home where I sleep, I'm going to light my own candles.
Yes, you can be Yotze. You can be Yotze, but it's definitely 100%. You can be Yotze, but you can also. And if you are in a dorm, Nale girls, you all light for yourselves, right? You're lighting for yourselves, right? No, you don't light there? But you light, someone's lighting there for you, right? You're lighting your part, okay? Okay, so interesting, one other idea, which supports the idea that a dafka has to be the doorway of your home. Super interesting source I came across. My students know I love also history and Second Temple history. The Book of Maccabees, source 6. The Book of Maccabees is an historical book not included in the Tanakh and the Apocrypha, and it tells us a lot about what happened with the Maccabees and the Greeks. Listen to what the Greeks wanted the Maccabees to do. Source 6. Now, the 15th day of the month was Kislev. The 15th day of the month Kislev, in the 145th year, they set up abomination of desolation upon the altar. So telling the story of Hanukkah, right? That the Greeks tried to desecrate our Beit HaMikdash, and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judea on every side, and burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. And when they had rent in pieces the books of the law which they found, they burnt them with fire. And whoever was found with any book of the Testament or any committed to the law, the king's commandment was that they should put him to death. Now, what did Maccabees just say about the houses, the doorways? What was going on there? The Greeks desecrated our Beit HaMikdash, our bayit to Hashem, okay? And as part of that ritual, they burnt incense at the doors of their houses to their gods. Wow. So we see here that there's also an element, when we light our Hanukkah candles at the doorway, okay, there's an element of remembering that the Greeks tried to wipe us out, and part of that, and desecrate Judaism, there's a midah keneged midah. You tried to destroy our religion, and our religion persists. So there's an interesting sort of midah keneged midah element to that.
So I think that kind of brings it home in a way that the essence of the holiday is that Hellenism, which focuses on the physical world, the physical body, and the philosophy was all about science and materialism, whereas the Jews, the light represents the Or Rishon, and that we made a choice at that time.
Yes.
That we are choosing God, that God is our creator and is in charge of everything, and it's a totally spiritual philosophy that we're choosing as opposed to the material.
Yes, that's all beautiful. And the question is, are we teaching ourselves that and our children, or are we trying to tell the world something? Or both. And that's one of the things I'm exploring here. So thank you for 100%. So now I want to share with you what the Tosfot says. Whenever we look at a Talmud, we have two Talmudic commentaries who often debate with each other, Rashi and Tosfot. Tosfot says something totally different than Rashi, okay? See, I'm just going to turn my slide. Tosfot says as follows, okay? I have to also mention one other Gemara. The Gemara, the Gemara stress tests Judaism. It takes it to all these places and says, well, what do you do here? And what do you do there? And what do you do there, right? So here it says, what happens if you have a chatzer, a courtyard, with two doorways, okay? Do you have to light one Chanukah? Or do there have to be a Chanukah at each entrance to the house? Okay? Or at each entrance, I'll say. So the Gemara says in source 7 on the page, Amar Rav Huna, chatzer sheyesh la shnei ptachim, tzricha shtei neirot. Now, what is it saying here? This is confusing. Chatzer, a courtyard that has two entrances, you need to have at both entrances Hanukkah candles lit. This is confusing. We were just talking about how beautiful, all this beautiful imagery, the doorway, Midah Keneged Midah, Pesach, everything, wonderful. What are we talking about the Chatzer? What is the Gemara confusing us now? So Tosfot makes some sense of this and says as follows. In source 8, it is a commandment to place it at the entrance to one's house on the outside. And it is speaking about when there is no courtyard, but is rather a house standing adjacent to the public domain. But if there is a courtyard in front of the house, the commandment is to place it at the entrance of the courtyard. For later it says, when a courtyard has two entrances, it requires two lamps. So if we had to say that Rashi and Tosfot, they're trying to be true to the true pshat, the true meaning of the Gemara, how should we practice best? What is the essence? Do we put it at our doorway because that has deep symbolism? Or do we put it more facing the public domain? Because the publicizing the miracle is actually the essence of this miracle. I would say that debate and living in that dialectic is the essence of Hanukkah. And so we're going to bring this to modern times now, because there's some other interesting places we sometimes light Hanukkah candles, and we have to understand why that is. So, have you ever been to synagogue where they light candles at synagogue? Yeah. Why on earth is that coming from? Why are we lighting it in the Beit Knesset? It's one thing to say Kiddush in the Beit Knesset and Havdalah, but why are we lighting Hanukkah candles in the Beit Knesset? What's the connection between synagogue? It's all about the home and the courtyard. What's going on there, right? How is that publicizing the miracle? And anyone who has lived anywhere near a Chabad, an active Chabad, right? Talk about publicizing the miracle, right? Right up there. Today, it's even at the point where, interesting that, the White House has Hanukkah parties, right?
Yeah.
So,
Kind of,
depends where. So, I want to begin. I'm just switching the order of your last two sources. If you look for a moment at source 10, you guys want to add anything? Okay, source 10, I'm going to read with you what Rav Melamed says. Rav Melamed is, you guys know Rav Melamed is an amazing rabbi. He's a rabbi of Har Bracha community in the Shomron. Some of us went to meet with him recently. Some of us are more halacha students here at Matan. And he has really done something amazing. He has written a sort of updated, upgraded codification of Jewish law, which really also tries to imbue the law with meaning, and most of it's been translated to English, I'm pretty sure, so most of it. And so if you're interested, it's a great book for learning Jewish law and understanding Jewish law. So look at what he says about the idea of publicizing the miracle. And then we're going to get to Chabad and close with that, of course. Many people glorify, this is source 10, many people glorify the miracle by lighting Hanukkah candles wherever people gather, like at weddings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, Hanukkah parties, and lectures. but may one recite a bracha over the lighting at such an event? You know, we only say the bracha once every night because otherwise that would be what's called bracha levatala, a waste, right? Taking God's name in vain. Many contemporary rabbis maintain that one should not recite a bracha because the brachot are customarily recited only in synagogues, and we do not have the authority to invent new customs in other places. By the way, I should add either in synagogues or home. According to them, a bracha that one recites in places other than in synagogues is considered a bracha levatala. The reason we light specifically in synagogues, because just to point out, I didn't bring the bit before, the mitzvah's in the home, to do it outside the home and facing the public domain. The rabbis allowed us to do it in synagogue. And the question is why? Where does that, how come, right? So he's explaining. The reason we light specifically in synagogues is likely to commemorate the menorah that was lit in the Holy Temple, since synagogues are considered a miniature version of the temple. So we see an example of how Jewish law developed, where there was a need in Jewish communities over time. Sometimes there were converts or Jews less affiliated who would come to shul, who that was the opportunity for them to hear the Chanukah candles being the brachot and light the Chanukah candles. And there was something more than that. It was the core of Jewish life in the diaspora, the synagogue. And so how can you not light a Chanukah candle? How can you not light a Chanukiah also in shul? And our shuls are like a miniature temple. Elsewhere, however, one may not light with a bracha. Nevertheless, several poskim maintain that one may light Hanukkah candles with a bracha wherever there is a public gathering. Since the reason we light in the synagogue is to publicize the miracle, one should light with a bracha wherever masses of people gather. It is preferable, though, also to pray Mincha and Mariv or just Mariv in such places so that it will be considered like a synagogue to some degree. Then one certainly may recite a bracha as the custom dictates. In practice, one who wishes to rely on the opinion that one may light with a bracha may do so. If the guests at the event include non-observant Jews who may not light candles at home, it is especially important to light with a bracha, because only then will everyone stand up to hear the brachot, causing the miracle to be publicized in front of their eyes, right? How many people have been to a work office candle lighting in Israel? Very common. They will also learn how to fulfill the mitzvah properly. If possible, it is preferable to ask someone who is unaccustomed to performing mitzvot to recite the brachot and light the candles. This way, it will become clear that the mitzvot belong to the entire Jewish people, observant Jews and non-observant Jews alike. He says some really beautiful things here. He says it really goes against the practice for so many years to light in offices and on the street and in Gan and all these places and at bar mitzvahs. However, the reality of the Jewish people is different today, and we have to recognize that. And today, this is the way we lefarsem the miracle, right? When we come together, and it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to spread that light, lefarsem the nes. Now we're talking about to the Jewish people, to the entire Jewish people, many of whom practice differently or don't practice at all. Now, that very much, I think, still fits with the notion that the Hanukkah candles is about bolstering us, bolstering the Jewish identity of the individual, of the family, and the Jewish people. What about lighting in a public in a way that is for the world to see? So it's fine for me to say when I lived in Riverdale, I would light and someone would see from the windows, the passersby, that's all well and good. But how many non-Jews really saw that? So come Chabad and say, how do we really lefarsem the miracle in the 1990s? This is what they said. Oh, okay, we really put it in the public square. Where's the Reshut HaRabim today? Right? Turns out, back then it was international satellite, okay? Now you should know that there was a huge controversy when Chabad started doing this, lighting these, sometimes they were electric, usually they were electric, these Chanukiyot in the middle of cities. It was controversial. People were against it. Who was against it? Anyone remember this historically? Specifically less affiliated Jews. There was particularly a Reform rabbi who came out very strongly against this. The idea was, listen, in America, this was in America we value the separation between church and state, so we don't mess with this, okay? We practice our Judaism. They tolerate us very well. We don't need to do it in their faces and start lighting Hanukkah candles at the town city hall is not a great idea because we want to keep separate church and state, Judaism and state. Chabad persisted, and I want to end, and of course it's clearly won out over time. It's a practice which happens around the world. And this is what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said in 1992, in Source 9, via satellite, when there was an international satellite hookup. In fact, the ability to see visually by satellite how one person, even a child, can light a candle seen around the world instantaneously teaches us that it is within the power of each one of us to light up the whole world. By satellite, we can unite Jews all over the world, no matter how dispersed. Thus, Hanukkah teaches the oneness of Israel, of God, and Torah. The satellite connection teaches the Jews that what happens in one place can have an effect in any other place. What happens in heaven, satellite, can have an effect on what happens on earth. If it is a mitzvah to place the candle on the outside of one's doorway to proclaim the miracle, then even more so is it a mitzvah to place it outside in a central public place, in a central public space for even greater proclamation of the miracle, including for the nations of the world, for they too are commanded to observe Torah, the laws of Noah. Of course, one's house should also be a source of light for one's environment, a house filled with inner spiritual light of Torah, prayer, and loving kindness. The Chanukah candles we light are comprised of two aspects. A, illuminating the world during the time of exile, and thereby B, preparing the world for coming redemption. So there's a whole sort of Lubavitch Chabad theology in here, which we can't get into so much, but the Rebbe very much, in coming from such steeped in tradition, does something radical in lighting these menorahs in the middle of cities, right? Saying suddenly it's not enough that each individual family lights their small Chanukah in their street corner or at the entrance to their home or courtyard. We need much more than that. We need to fill the world to see, for the world to see, this is the Jewish people. This is what the Jewish people, they're lighting. And how are they lighting? They're lighting outside. They're trying to connect with the world. They are increasing the light, right? Going up, elevating in holiness. And in fact, when we look at the sources, we see that this is the dialectic that we are meant to live with. On the one hand, building up our Jewish faith and commitment and strengthening ourselves and being inspired, and at the same time, wearing that proudly to the world. And I think that is the message of Hanukkah. And may the light of Hanukkah spread in our times in the face of the oncoming, growing anti-Semitism that we were seeing. Everyone should have a Chanukah Sameach.